Okay, so I've done a little bit of smoothing on that. Overall, it's relatively good. You just get it to the way that you quite like it. Now this mud at the moment is a little bit washed out. It just doesn't look quite good as mud at the moment. So let's click on the paint terrain and go back to the paint texture again. We want to click on this base mud. Okay, so at the moment our metallic, if we just play around with this, we can actually make it really dark by going up to 1, and the smoothness, if we go all this way, we basically get something that's really super shiny. So what we actually want to do is try and come down to like 0 on the smoothness. Now what I'm thinking there is that effectively this mud it's just not dark enough. So what I'll do for the next video is make sure that you've got the same texture, but I'll basically just darken it inside of like Photoshop or something, so that you can then replace that and it can be a much darker sort of mud colour. Okay, now we want to make sure that it's not as dark as the path, but that it's just a little bit darker than it is at the moment. Smoothness. Okay, so what we also want to do is apply some post-processing. The post-processing is really going to give this scene it's sort of like it's professional quality. I also want to apply some fog. Okay, so if we go into the lighting section and into the scene, we can see that we've got a section for fog right at the bottom. So if we click this and actually apply some fog, you'll see a slight bit of fog just appearing, as long as you've got this switched on. If you switch that off, it disappears. Okay, so that through your game tab you can see a slight bit of fog appearing, and the density determines how much fog you get. So for example, if I said 0.08, it would be absolutely smothered in fog. Now what we see is that the fog is only affecting the actual objects themselves, but it's not affecting the background, the skybox, and that kind of looks weird. Alright, so what we want is for it to actually exclude this skybox. Now that will only happen as long as you are using a deferred renderer. So in the hierarchy, under our first person controller, we can click on the actual camera, and in the inspector, our rendering path is currently using the graphic settings, whatever that's currently set to in your quality settings. Well, we want to use our drop down and change to deferred. Alright, we'll change the way that things look a little bit. It'll make them look a slight bit better. But now that we're deferred, we can go back to our lighting, and we should be able to exclude the skybox in the post-processing effects for our fog. Okay, you'll also notice that it's actually affected the overall fog itself. For example, if I go to 1.5, it's not doing anything. We've got a little bit of a warning saying it has no effect on opaque objects when using the deferred shading rendering. Well, once we apply the post-processing, it will. Alright, it will work. So let's do the post-processing now then. Just going to go to my scene view. We are going to apply this to the first-person character camera, so make sure you got that selected. And inside of the inspector, we're going to add a component and just type post, and it'll come up with your post-processing. The first thing we need is a layer. Okay, the layer is usually attached to the camera. As soon as I do that, my fog's come back. Okay, so I'm just going to reduce my fog amount down to like 0.01 or something. Okay, so post-processing layer is attached to the camera, that's its trigger, and its layer, it's looking for post-processing as a layer. What I can see is there are no post-processing layers, so we're going to have to create this. So right at the top of the camera, where we see our layer, we're going to click on this and choose add a layer. Now I'm going to use the first empty slot, which for me is layer 8, and we're just going to type post-processing, all as one word, spelled exactly like this. Well, maybe not exactly like that, but like this. Capital P for both post and processing. Press enter. Now in order for post-processing to work, it does need to reside on that particular layer. So click back on your first person character and under your layer choose post-processing. And now under this layer we can now find and choose post-processing. Alright, so now it's going to work. Next we want some anti-aliasing. So we get a number of different options. Probably the best one is the temporal anti-aliasing, but I feel it kind of softens things out a bit too much. I'll show you. So if I click this, things become a little bit too soft. I mean, just look, I'm not too keen on that one. But if I go over to the subpixel, I like this one a little better. The subpixel morphological anti-aliasing, the SMAA, just smooths out the edges of things so that they're not as jagged. Okay, and it's quite nice. Now the fog, where it says exclude skybox, let's ensure that we uncheck that one, and now we can see that our fog is actually excluding that skybox, and it's going all the way to the end. So if I now, for example, increase my fog amount to, like, let's say 0.5, you can see that it really, if we just check it out, it looks quite impressive. Yeah, so now it looks like I'm actually in a bit of a forest there. You know, I can't really see very far ahead. Okay, which is quite nice. The actual colour of it, I'm not entirely too happy with this kind of grey colour for the fog. So I'm just going to click on the actual fog colour itself and change the hexadecimal code. I've got one stored. So 8F AB, whoa, that green is insane, A5. Okay, so this is more of a kind of a bluish greenish kind of tint that I think kind of looks quite nice. So it gives it almost like a fantasy feel to it, which I think is pretty cool for like a forest type scene. All right. So let's actually get into the post-processing now then. So under our hierarchy, make sure we've got our first person character selected, and in our inspector we can now add another component. So what we need is an actual volume this time. The post-process volume is where you attach all of your effects to, and we're going to make this one global. So we're going to click global so it affects the entire scene. The weight is how much does it affect your scene overall. So at the moment it's full strength. If it was halfway down, it will be half strength. Priority, we're fine with that, and we're going to create ourselves a new profile. The profile is basically where it stores all of your settings. So we're just going to click new in order to create one. It automatically does that for you, and then we're going to add our effects. So in Unity, these are all the effects that we can choose from. The first one I'm going to go with is color grading. Okay, so if I use my drop down, we have to check things on as we need them. So I'm going to click mode. It's going to be high definition. Got a little bit of a warning, but don't worry about that. And then for my tone mapping, I want to change from my none to the aces, which gives you a more like film-like quality. So when I click this, notice we've now got a lot more contrast going on. It's looking a little bit more effective. For my temperature, we can warm this up or cool it down, okay, using the temperature. The temp that I want is around 10. So a little bit of a warmer temperature. We can also tint this slightly. So if you tint it, you can go like really insane or just very kind of slight. So what I want on this is around -8.1. All right, slight greenish look to my forest. The post-exposure EV is basically the exposure values in stop values. So if you increase this, you get a brighter scene. If you decrease it, you get really, really dark. All right, so depending on what you want. For mine, I'm going to go with -0.6. All right, just darken it down a little bit so it's not so bright and in your face. My colour filter, I'm going to apply an overall colour to this to warm it up a bit. And click on the actual colour itself. Now I've got some values I'm going to put in here. So for my red, I'm going to go with 191. For my blue, for the green, I'm going to go with 178. And for the blue, I'm going to go with 161. And the intensity, I'm going to go with +1. Alright, just going to brighten it all back up again. But notice we've lost that greenishness. But now the fog, it still has a slight greenishness, but it's looking a little bit more professional now. For my saturation, you can either really saturate it and go crazy, or you can even create black and white scenes. So the value I want for my saturation is around 19.2, just to make it a bit more colourful. And for the contrast, you can obviously increase your contrast to make it like really super contrast, or you can decrease it to make it like greyish. So for this one, I want around 8.5. Okay, there we go. So in the scene, we can see it's looking a little bit more professional now with some of the post-processing color filters. So the next one is I'm going to go with the bloom next, which is going to give us some nice highlights in the lit areas. So for this one, I'm going to switch on my intensity and my threshold. So if I come up in my intensity and then decrease my threshold by clicking and dragging, notice how it kind of brightens things up, and you've got this diffuse glow around anything that's kind of bright or lightly lit, which can be quite nice. I'm going to switch on my softening and my diffusion. Okay, so for my intensity, I'm going to go with 1.91. For my threshold, I'm going to go with 0.6. For my softening, leave it at 0.5. And for diffusion, I'm going to go with 6.9. Okay, so it really brightens things up quite a bit there. Okay, so the next one, I'm going to add another effect, and we're going to go with ambient occlusion, which is going to simulate sort of shadows on the ground. So where two objects are very close to each other, it will provide sort of fake shadowing. So if I click on this, the mode is going to be the multi-scale, and the intensity, if I really bring this up, you'll notice what it's doing. Can you see that? How it's really making various bits very shadowy. Now you definitely don't want to go overboard on this one. I'm going to go with 0.57. Alright, so there's a slight little bit of ambient occlusion in certain areas, which is quite nice. For my next one, I'm now going to go with a bit of grain. Alright, this is very much like film grain. So we want coloured grain, and the intensity, we can go crazy on this and bring it up like this, so it's very much filmic, or you can lower it down. I'm only going to go with a very slight bit of grain, 0.096. So there is a very slight bit of grain there, but it just makes it look slightly more professional. I'm going to add another effect, and this one's going to be chromatic aberration. So this comes from like when people used to film using camera lenses, the lens would be curved. So toward the edge of the lens, there would be some aberration of colours. So I'll show you what this looks like. So if I switch on my intensity and really go crazy, it was basically an effect that looked like this, where you got the reds and the greens sort of separating because the lens was so sort of warped towards the edge. You'll see a lot of games do kind of use chromatic aberration toward the edges of their screen, but once again, it's one that you want to kind of keep as a very subtle amount. So I'm going to go with about 0.5. Oh no, that's too much. 0.05. Yeah, we've got a slight bit of aberration toward the edge of the screen that's going to make it look quite nice. Then, well, we've got various other things. I mean, feel free to check out depth of field. That's really cool. The auto exposure, you would use this, for example, if you're going indoors, outdoors a lot. It will automatically change the lighting to suit the, you know, whether you're indoors or outdoors. we don't need to bother with that in this scene. Lens distortion, very similar to chromatic aberration, but it's only really for certain effects. You can get like fisheye lens with this. Screen space reflections for when you need a lot of reflective surfaces and you need to simulate that. Motion blur, mostly effect based, great for driving games and things like that. Not very good for this type of thing. I think you get quite motion sick if you use motion blur. So our last one is a vignette. So if we click this, I'm going to click mode, color, center, and then the intensity. So this is basically just going to give you this. Okay, so we want it to only be very slight, and it's basically just going to give us a slight dark element around the scene itself. Let's go to smoothness actually and try and smooth this out a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now we can see a little bit of darkness around the edge of our screen. All right, so if I now try and play through this, I want to check out my stats, see what I'm getting. So it's had a little bit of an effect on my frames per second, about 440, and my triangles about 828, my vertices 817, so I'm still doing relatively good in terms of geometry. But I think the scene's looking a lot nicer. But you will find that if you're looking in an area where you've got loads and loads of trees, your frames per second is definitely going to take a hit. But you will notice that with the fog in place, you know, the triangles and stuff and the vertices are not as high as they normally were before because you can't see as much stuff. Okay, so effectively as a bit of a base map, it's starting to sort of come to life, and we've hardly put anything in it yet. We've only put like a few of our key hero trees in there at the moment, so we've got loads left to do on this, but overall, yeah, quite nice. And if at any point you want to kind of make your own like look for this, let's say, what you can do, you can click on this profile and let me see, if it takes me into the project, you could, for example, clone this one. So you could right click on it and nope, you can't duplicate, so you'd have to go to edit and duplicate from there in order to duplicate this, and then you would drag it into that slot, and you could then make some changes without ruining the original. So then you can have multiple profiles, and you could try making your own kind of look for this if you want. So in this video, I want to actually sculpt like a river or some kind of a stream within my scene. Okay, so it's pretty difficult to see at the moment with the fog, so we can just click this little triangle and just temporarily switch off the fog. Okay, I'm going to use this section at the bottom here in order to create some kind of a river. Now at the moment, I've just tried to do this, and because it's at an angle, it makes it very difficult. So what I need to do is sort of flatten this part out so that I can have a kind of a flat river type thing. So when we click on our terrain, we can go to our inspector, and I'm just going to use this brush, basically brush 4, and I'm going to go to raise or lower terrain. Okay, my brush size, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control and left click to lower the terrain. And you'll notice that this will actually lower it down. Okay, so it's pretty much on the ground. All right, so if that's the kind of if that were a kind of an effect that you wanted or something, you could easily do that in order to create sort of this type of an area. Now the issue I've got there is that I can't actually sculpt into that because it's actually on ground level. In fact, what I might do actually is I might just come down there as well. So what I need to do is I need to raise this up a little bit. So I need to go back to my set height, and I'd like to raise this instead of 1.5. I'm just going to raise this around, let's try 0.8. Just click on that, and now what I can do is actually just click until it sort of maxes out at about that amount. Come all the way along. Don't worry about the edges and things, we'll smooth those out shortly. Great, so now I've got something that's on a level. It's basically a straight level. So now I can actually sculpt into that and get a nice sort of river effect. So to do this, I'm going to be using one of the new terrain tools, which is an erosion tool. Now we get 3 different types of erosion. Hydraulic, which is water-based erosion. Thermal, which is like either hot or cold, so it's the effect of like snow or like a desert type sediment on rock surfaces. And wind-based erosion, which is great for like canyons and sort of desert type things. So the one that we want to go with is hydraulic. Now these are a little bit complex, so I would certainly recommend doing a bit of reading up on these. Under the erosion controls, we have a whole bunch of advanced options, and I'm not really going to mess with these too much, other than to say that the simulation scale is going to have an effect over what you get. So the lower that we go on the simulation scale, you will actually get a little bit more detail. The higher you go, the softer the actual thing will become. So I want to go relatively soft, about 74, and it will technically simulate the effect of like water traveling over rock over a very, very long time. So I want to choose a good brush. We've got various brushes called canyons. Canyon 2, Canyon 3, Canyon 4, etc. I actually want to go with this Canyon 2. Now what we can see already is that that looks like some kind of a river. But you can also see along the edges that we've got these sort of shapes, if you like. They're not bad, but they extend a little bit too far out. So what I want to do is I want to change this brush a little bit. And it is completely procedural. If I remap it by clicking and dragging, you can see that I can start to get rid of some of that grey area on the outside. So if I come down to something like this, I've got rid of some of that. And this part in the middle, I actually want to increase this so that it becomes whiter and whiter. So that when I come down to something like this, it's mostly all river now, or stream, or whatever you want it to be. My brush size, I'm just going to come up a little bit on my brush size. So something like this, so I get a good bit. And I'm going to rotate until I'm quite happy with the angle of it. Now the issue I've got there is it's going to be going onto this surface, so I am going to have to reduce my size, I think. Rotation. So maybe I'll start with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click in order to set it onto the ground. So if I click, it'll actually erode it. If I click and hold, it will continue to simulate. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing that. You can even move your mouse slightly if you want, and it's going to basically go right down to ground 0, so wherever the base is, and you can see you've now got basically a sculpted kind of river out of there. Now it's not bad, but I'm actually not too happy with that. So what I'm going to do is Control and Z to undo all of those steps. I mean, that's slightly better. So what I'm going to do is Control and Z again. Is I'm going to, part of my remap, I'm just going to drag it a little bit like that. So I've now got a slight bit of detail, and my brush strength, I'm just going to come up quite a bit on that. Okay, this is looking far more effective. Yeah, something like this. So it's looking much better. Might just keep going down. So you can see if you go down too much that you get, it starts to kind of take away some of those details. But overall, yeah, okay, that's quite nice, I think. I want to do the same thing here again, but this time I'm going to rotate my brush around, and I might even make it a bit smaller. So I want to come in like this. Yeah, okay, so now you can see that the water itself will basically sit in that kind of a ravine, if you like. And then maybe just finally I can sort of scale it and rotate it. I might just get that little bit there. Okay, good. Alright, so we've been able to kind of sculpt out a little bit of a riverbed. What we want to do now is fill this with water. So under our project and our standard assets, we have environment, water, and bear in mind there's two types of water here. There's water 4 and just water. So water 4 is more like the ocean. It's got like waves and ripples and things like that. This water is more kind of still water that you would expect to see in like rivers and lakes and streams and those kind of things. Prefabs, and we've got 2 of them. So Water Pro daytime, not the nighttime one. So let's just drag this in. Okay, maybe just pull this up a bit. And what you can see is that this is actually it's circular, isn't it? So it would be much better if we could use a square shape. So where we can see our mesh, water plane mesh, let's just click on this and choose the plane. Okay, so that it effectively becomes like a big square, and we can now just scale this into whatever size we want. Let's drag it this way a bit and over here, and then we can obviously just scale this until we get it just right. Great, and then I might just come up a little bit to maybe somewhere like that, so that when we get close to it, now we can see we've got a little bit of a river going on there. Okay, and obviously it's just extending all the way along there. So rivers can be a little bit difficult to actually make unless you're working on a flat surface. All right, it's much easier to do them on that kind of a surface. So what I need to do now basically is just a little bit of sculpting on this in order to make it look more effective. So back to the terrain then in the inspector. What I can do now, in fact, let me just reset my brush back to normal. I can probably come to, let me go to my stamped terrain. Let me find a relatively good one. I think this is the one I've been using. It's pretty good, so I'm going to come down with my size here. Just going to increase the strength a little bit, and let's just try and in fact the strength is too much, isn't it? So let me undo that a couple of times. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's a little bit tight right there, so need to do here is my strength, just pull that down. Okay, so we've got a little bit of detail going on there. I could probably do something like that on there. Okay, and now it's a case of coming to the smooth height. And for this one, we're going to use like the noise brush, which is built in brush 4. Brush size, I might just make this a little bit bigger. My brush strength is all the way on 1, verticality -1 and 1, and my brush spacing is on 0, so it'll have massive effect on it. Notice how that kind of really just softens everything out. Do the same with that obvious kind of ridge there. So the longer you click and drag on it, more of an effect it has. Okay, now I'm going to come over to my raise or lower terrain, and I'm going to reduce my size down to something like this. Now this is very much a sculpting tool. I'm going on brush strength of about 0.012, and it's just a case of clicking, dragging. You're just basically trying to sculpt something. Now this is very much by hand, so this is the way that we used to create terrains and mountains before, when you had to basically physically sort of sculpt them and design everything yourself. So I'm just going to draw a few of these kind of bumps and ridges and things like that. And then I'm going to go back to my smooth height again, reduce the size of this, and I'm going to increase my brush spacing a little bit to about 5. And then in this way I can now soften a lot of these out so they're not as bumpy. In fact, I'm going to reduce my brush spacing down to about 2. No, I'm going to reduce my brush spacing down to 0, and then that's going to soften all these out. I think this needs a little bit of work, so once again over to the raise or lower terrain. Gonna kind of just create some few little bumps and those kind of things. And then over to the smooth height and just start smoothing that back out again. Great, so now if I'm on this path, I can now see that I've got a little bit of a river going on down there, so I can be looking down at this sort of river itself. Alright, which is interesting. It does kind of stop there, but shouldn't really be too much of a problem. If I need to extend the terrain, obviously I can create a neighbour terrain, not too much of a problem. But overall, yeah, I think that's quite nice. Don't worry about this river underneath, we'll never see that. So now if I switch my fog back on, alright, so you can see as I'm toward the edge of this, I can see that water's getting masked out by the fog so that it's partially visible. So let's see what it looks like in the game. Now we need to keep an eye on our frames per second and everything in order to see what kind of an effect all that sculpting's add on what we've been doing. So I'm getting about 450, 350 or so. Now I've got to find the actual thing. 100, 200, so it's fluctuating quite a lot. It's not over there, is it? No. 450 again. Right, so I feel like I'm just running in circles now. It's got to be around here somewhere, surely. Ah, okay. So I'm struggling to find where. There it is. Okay, good. So it's down to around 270 frames per second once we hit that area. We can see that we've got about roughly 1.2 million triangles, 1.1 million vertices. So the more you sculpt, the more detail it takes. So yeah, we've got a little bit of a river going on there. That we can look down on, and as we come down here, yeah, we can actually check that out. It looks kind of interesting. I'm thinking what I'm going to do, where we have these edges and it's clearly just stopped, I'm actually going to put some rock faces in there, so it looks like the river's actually just leaking into like into a rock. In fact, it's not so much of a river, is it? It's more of just a little stream. But overall, yeah, it's quite nice overall. Okay, and it's not massively eating into our frames per second. Great, so that is how you create rivers and water elements. In one of the previous videos, I said I was going to give you a new texture for this mud. But actually, after checking this out, I'm actually quite happy with the quality of the mud, the colour of it now. It sort of provides a really nice contrast with this path. So I think if we made it any darker, it would be difficult to actually see the path itself. So I'm quite happy just to leave it as it is at the moment now that we've done the post-processing on it. If I change my mind a little bit later, I will provide you with that image. Okay, so what I want to do now is bring in some kind of rocks and that kind of thing in order to make this like little stream, I guess it is, look a little bit more effective. Okay, so in the project, under assets, we have our props, and inside of here we have our rocks and boulders too, and we have our rocks, prefabs, not the prefab snow, and we've got a whole bunch to choose from. So what I'm going to go with is these really large ones. We've got rock 2 and rock 5A. So I'll start off with rock 2. Let's just drag this into scene. As you can see, they look quite nice. So just gonna drag this over here like this. Just a little bit like this. And then we've also got our rock 5A as well. Something like this. So we want to create it as though it's all one kind of piece of rock, if you like, so it doesn't look like multiple pieces. And in fact, what I'm going to do in my hierarchy is just click on this rock 2 again and duplicate, Control D. Remember that the shortcut is just there. And now I can move this one across. Just to make sure that it looks a bit different, I'm going to kind of rotate this around so that it kind of looks like this. Alright, so we've got a little bit of a rock face going on there. And I also want that to carry on around here as well. So my rock 5A, I can duplicate this one and move this way. You can also, if you want, kind of scale these up a little bit. I wouldn't scale too much. Just enough to give them a nice bit of a variation. Let's duplicate this one again and move it this way. So let's take a look at that. Yeah, okay, that's looking all right, quite effective. Gonna come this way this time. If the fog is kind of getting in your way, just switch the fog off temporarily. And if you're having difficulty seeing with the grid, we can just click on here in order to switch the grid off. So I'm going to use, in fact, yeah, I'm going to use this one again. So duplicate it, move it this way, and then let's just rotate. So maybe something like this. Yeah, it's looking good. In fact, I might even come quite forward with that one. My rock 5A, this smaller one, gonna bring this one out to here. Set that out like that. That's pretty good. I might actually just leave that as the edge there, because obviously I'm going to be putting some trees in as well. So along this side now we need more of these rocks, I think. Let me see what I've got. I'm going to duplicate this one, just move it over here like this, and yeah, I think I'm going to rotate it around like that. I'm going to bring this one down so it's sort of sitting on here a little bit, and I might just squash that in a little bit. Duplicate this one again. Bring this one around, and once again it's just a matter of rotating. For this one I might actually just make this a little bit bigger and just kind of stretch it slightly, so it gives it a nice bit of variety and variation. Might use the same one again. Come around like this. Yeah, okay, I think that looks fine. And then finally use this one. Control D again, and let's move this into position and just rotate this one around so it looks like this is the end of the rock. Okay, great. And what that does, it kind of solves that issue of just having the kind of river just ending at the edge of the terrain. You can't go beyond the terrain now. We've got some nice cliff faces coming out, and we've got ourselves a little bit of a water feature just in there. If you want to create other streams and other bits of water, feel free to do so. You can put in as many as you like. But yeah, overall, I think that's quite nice. All right, and obviously we'll dress up this little water area. We'll have lots of props and details going on there in order to really make it look nice. Now in this video, we want to start putting in a few more props and details in these areas here, where we've got these sort of few trees in our foreground elements. So we probably want to put a few interesting kind of rocks and that kind of thing in here. So if we go into our project, now we do have these types of rocks, but I also want to take a look at the photo scanned mountains and rocks. Now if you go into the prefabs, these ones have already been set up with their own colliders. So for example, if I drag this one into the scene, you can see that we've got really nice kind of big rock. If I just click off it, you can see it looks quite nice. You can It sort of looks like it sort of belongs in that scene. So it's just a case of now going through and just dragging some of these into here. So for example, I could have this one, and I would recommend sort of dragging them down into the ground. And we can put another one over in this sort of gap right about here. So perhaps this one's quite a big one. But bear in mind, you can sort of, you know, scale them down a little bit. Just down into the ground a little bit. Just double check them from various angles. Yeah, I think they're okay. And obviously we also have, well, you have mossy rocks, and you also have some more rocks in your rocks and boulders. So let's have a look at the mossy rocks actually. Under meshes, we have basically 3 different types of rocks. It's coming tiny, hasn't it? This kind of rock. This one's probably going to be more suited to like where we put the stream or that little river. Let's delete that one out. Let's take a look at this one. Scale it up. That's not bad, but once again, it is quite wet, a wet rock. If you want to put those in this main scene, feel free to do so. I'm probably not going to. I'm going to go back to my rocks and boulders, to my rocks, prefabs. Obviously we've got various just boulders, if you like, so I'm going to drag one of these boulders in and just drag it down into the ground. Let's have a look. I might put something whoa, that's big, isn't it? Might put it kind of extending out like that. And I think perhaps that's a little bit too big, so I might just shrink that down a little bit. Yeah, okay, so that's extending out into the path area there. So just going around and sort of looking for areas where you can put some interesting kind of rocks. There are also smaller kind of rocks as well. That one's quite nice. Just put that down there like that. Now let's say on the path, for example, we wanted some smaller rocks. We've got some little tiny ones like rock group 1. We can just drag those in. Yeah, something like that. So it looks like there's a few little rocks along the path. Just going to press F. Oh, make sure I've got my terrain selected, and then press F, and then it'll zoom me right in. I might put something here, so let's take a look and see what that one's quite big. Don't want that one. What does this one look like? Yeah, they're pretty small. Put those there. It's just kind of getting a few nice little details going on. I don't know what's down this side. Let's take a look. Yeah, so there's not a lot of detail down here, so let's put some stuff in. Put that one there. Let's take a look. Yeah, maybe a few of these. They're relatively good. Sticking out onto the path itself. Maybe something around here. Let's have a look. Yeah, I think that should be okay. That one's quite an angular, sharp rock. Okay, some of those, they look okay from a distance, but not necessarily when you get close. Let's just put a few of these over here. Yeah, something like that. Just a few of those there. So let's just take a quick look through our game tab, and what I'm looking for is what kind of an effect is this having on the frames per second. So about 430, 440, got around 480,000 triangles at the moment just going on there. When I look this way, 198. So I've got around 2 million there, 2 million triangles. Okay, so that's quite a bit. I've not even got all my trees in yet. I'm guessing, yeah, that's because of these big mountains in the back there and stuff. Got a lot of detail going on there. 1.8 million. Still at about 200 frames per second, so that's actually still really good. As long as I'm kind of keeping above 30 frames per second, I'm quite happy. If it falls below 30 frames per second, then obviously there's a major issue, and I would need to do something to optimize the scene. Overall, yeah, the rocks make quite a nice little bit of a change there. Add a nice bit of detail. You'll notice on this one that that's not a particularly great rock. It's a bit too angular. They're okay, they're not too bad. And obviously they're quite nice. So I've got detail pretty much everywhere. Good. Alright, so in terms of rocks, I would say I'm quite happy with those. There's not a lot of rocks down here, but that's fine. So I think what I might do now is just put a few mossy rocks along this stream area. So let's have a go at doing that. So let me just switch off this fog for a while, because it gets a bit difficult to see, doesn't it? Here we go. So just click on the terrain, press F to get a little bit closer. So we want a few mossy rocks in this area. So I'm probably going to use this green one, bring these in, these little tiny mossy rocks. Let's just make them a lot bigger. And we can have something like, yeah, like this. Now while I've got it selected, I can do a Control D in order to sort of duplicate this. Rotate this around. Maybe have it kind of going into the water itself. Might even scale this one up a little bit more so it's a bit bigger. It's actually in the water itself. We've also got this one, which is super tiny. Yep, okay, that one's quite nice. So I could drag it around like that, maybe. Yeah, something like this. Let's take a look at this one. So this one was more of a kind of a greyish type rock, wasn't it? Yeah. One could just be sticking out of the water a little bit, that'd be quite nice. Might get another one of these, so just click on it, Control D to duplicate. I want to rotate it around a little bit, so get a variation. Yep, something like that. Yeah, just to sort of, you know, give it a little bit of substance, bring it to life a bit more. I might get a few more of these rocks along here actually. So Control and D. Now I'm going to make this one pretty big, so let's scale this up. Yep, something like this. And we can have, I'm going to Control and D, we can have like just a few of these. And then later when we get into putting in our ivy and all of our flowers and those kind of things, we can really sort of detail these with loads of that. Might just take one of these, Control and D. And then, oh, actually that one's an exact repetition of that one. So try and avoid doing something that looks like a mirror opposite of something that's very close to it. Might just have that there like that. It gives a nicer variety in that way. Okay, great. So now that's looking a little bit more like a natural sort of stream area. So let's check it out in our game scene. If I can find it. Just wait for the frames per second to drop. It's kind of an indication of where it's based. There it is. Okay, yep, so I get there and now I can see all of these rocks, and now it's looking slightly better and more kind of natural. And as you can see, these textures on these mossy rocks is really incredible. I mean, to say that I actually made those gigantic. However, they've not got any colliders. Okay, that's a bit of an issue. Can fix that soon, not a problem.